Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host Jivraj, and today I have with me a very special guest. Join me in welcoming Mr. Kaushik Subramaniam, who's one of the foremost product leaders from India, who spent a ton of time in diverse fields, eventually to land up in product and emerge as this amazing, thoughtful, kind person. Thank you so much, Kaushik, for joining me. I know this has been some time in the making, but finally glad to be doing this.
Thank you so much, Jivraj. Really happy to be here. And as you said, we've been working on this for a while, so I'm really happy that we could finally do it.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited to get started because I know this is going to be amazing in terms of how you think and how your thoughts are going to come along. So I want to jump right in and start off with a rather, if not abstract, a question that will set the narrative right for everyone tuning in. Because I think that there's so much of noise around product talent, about product resource, about everything related to product in the landscape that as a 20-year-old, something I could easily get confused, right? Because given the noise, there's so much around us. But given your experience and given your vantage point, if you could just clarify at the very start what product thinking essentially means, why is it important to begin with as well, and what is all the noise about, I think that would set the narrative right for all of us and would set a great foundation as we proceed further with this conversation.
Sure. I like to think about this from an old world versus new world perspective, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about like a traditional business, and I work in both traditional businesses and technology businesses. So like traditional business, let's assume like someone selling soap, right? Mm-hmm. You would always have the business side separate from the product development side. Right. And usually the business side will have no idea of what the product development side is doing and vice versa. The other thing that would also happen is that you would the research team in the soap company would build or would make a soap that, let's say, the business wants, right? And so your sales folks will come and say that we want a soap that looks like this and that smells like this. Yes. And so your lab will go and make something like that. What has happened with technology, and this is the new word, right, is that number one, product development is not separate from the business side, right? And why is that? That's because ideally, and not all companies do this, but ideally, at least the thinking is that you want to build products that solves a customer problem or build products that customers love, right? Ideally, a combination of both. And because you're able to do that, what ends up happening is that there is this amalgamation of business and technology that comes together that enables people to not only, figure out what to build or what to make in terms of like customer problem, product discovery, all of those kinds of things, but also get that out very, very quickly. And from an MVP point of view, experiment and do all of those kinds of things and do that multiple times over a period of a half. You can do this in the new world. In this old world of soap, you can do that you cannot do that firstly. And product cycles are maybe yearly, right? Over here, I can ship something every month. Because of this difference, now if you think about like from a talent perspective, right? The difference that has happened is that my fundamental view is this, is that we got into talent thinking about like this is a factory worker. And I'll talk a little bit more about like empowering teams and stuff. But like we said, okay, this is a factory worker. Somebody is stitching the cloth. Like if it's a factory making shirts, somebody's cutting the cloth, somebody's stitching the cloth, somebody's stitching the buttons. The manager of cutting people and the manager of stitching people report to a shirt manager, who then reports to a clothes manager, right? Take the same thing essentially and translated it to the old world in this soap making company. But in the new world, I think there is an amalgamation of all of these things that is happening. So to be honest, I think most people are still figuring it out. And I feel like the only place that has found some kind of a semblance of structure is Silicon Valley, where, you have like, the Silicon Valley school of like product thinking, which is kind of like what Marty Kagan talks about, which is you go from customer problem, to actually like, the MVP, and then you experiment, and then you build and launch the product and so on and so forth. And then you find product market fit, right? That is the school that works so far. Now, considering the number of tech companies that are being built and the amount of interest in technology, people are like, hey, everything requires a specialist skill in general, right? Like to write code, you need to know how to write code. To be a data scientist, you need to know at least Python and like a few other things, right? But like, hey, I can be a product manager if I'm a technical person. I can be a product manager if I'm a business person. And I'm using product manager in like, loosely, right? So product marketing, product manager, product, whatever. And that is why I think there is this interest. So it's a longish answer to what you were saying, but like that's the framework in which I like to think about.
No, that's interesting. I mean, so the fundamental causation, as far as I can understand, is this, advancement of technology, which brings the product and business end together and amalgamates with the product thinking and the product roles that you mentioned. But no, that's a good understanding of, what we're going to discuss and what the context is going to be like. But coming to your journey and, having a question related to that in terms of taking control of your career, right? And this was something that we discussed briefly about as well. But if you could ponder a bit more about, considering that the audience set is such that, we're all almost always thinking about how to transition in or transition out, break in, break out. These are so common terms and these look like hacks, but I'm sure there has to be a science behind it. And given that you've had the benefit of hindsight of moving from a marketing role to a consultancy role to a product role, I think it would be interesting to just understand from you that as to how can somebody young in their career, if not young also, forget age, how can somebody have the conscious recognition of where they want to head, then the awareness of what they want to do, and then the choice of moving towards that direction, paving that pathway. I think that in its entirety will be amazing to hear and just understand better, because otherwise it just again looks like something that we could easily get lost into or caught up in the race of, which I'm sure is not something which most people want to do but end up eventually doing it either way. So I think that would be amazing to hear from you.
Sure. So I think that's a great question, right? I think the way I like to think about it, and it's not that I had this clarity of thought, several years ago, but like at least the way now I think about it intentionally, but post rationalizing, I think about it more as like using product terms. Think of product market fit for yourself, right? And think about what your own product vision is for yourself, right? So if my product vision is that I want to, get to this role or like have this kind of an impact or become this kind of a person, I need to be able to do that in areas where I have product market fit. And let me elaborate on that a little bit. So let's say, for example, like I am a marketing person and I am in consumer goods, and as was the case with me. And if you're doing well, you found product market fit in that specific niche. But the question is, do you want, like, what is the TAM on that? What is the TAM on that career? And what is the profitability on that career? And honestly, if you think about it objectively in that way, I think you tend to get a lot of clarity. Now the question is, and this is a concept I'm working on now, right? Like, is thinking about like what is like me as a product and finding product market fit in my career for myself, right? I think it comes down to a few things. I think the first one is, do you like, what is it that you enjoy doing the most and where you kind of perform your best? Because I feel like choosing careers because of short-term optimizations, like a great salary or a super bike, is probably not the best way to approach like a long-term career. The second thing is, I think, how quickly is this industry going to grow, and how quickly is like demand going to grow for people in this particular industry or in this particular function. That's number two. And I think number three is, what unique value are you able to add, or what unique value can you develop in order to win in this particular industry, right? I'm still thinking about like this concept generally, but broadly I think about like, where do I find product market fit? What is the TAM? And if I feel that like, yes, I found product market fit in this niche, but I'm not doing enough, I kind of go to it, right? If I think about my career, I did like consumer goods and I found some PMF there, but I just felt that like, hey, it's not an industry that like I would enjoy being in 20, 30 years down the line. So, I did consulting. I didn't find PMF there because I like, yes, I enjoyed it, but like I was like exhausted and there was no work-life balance and all of those kinds of things. And then I'm in technology and I love doing that. And, I would like to think I found PMF, but as you also know, PMF is a continuous process. So, yeah, you have to keep hydrated.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love the anecdotes and the analogy that you've used there, because that's going to be very helpful just from a relative standpoint. But just to double click on that aspect of experimentation, right? So I think what some of us do get into the barrage of is that, we have to get it right the first time, or to just take a step back, reflect, and accept that this is not working out may not be the first preference or may not be as easy as it seems, right? So if you can just talk us through what that experimentation essentially entails, if at all that's important, because most people don't get it right in the first shoot, right? Like, I'm guessing that this is a process that builds itself. So if you could just walk us through your opinions on that front, I think that'd be wonderful.
Sure. I would love to. I think experimentation is hard, especially from like a career perspective, and it requires a lot of hard work without any kind of reward or any kind of short-term reward, right?
Right.
Um, I think the few things that I think folks must do when thinking about like changing is one, talk to lots of people. Like I'm almost amazed with the number of people who do not take advantage of like cold emailing or cold DMing people and just picking their brain for 15 minutes on with a specific ask, right? Um, more people you talk to, more you're able to stitch the landscape together. Number two is and this is a fact, right? Like humans try to look for data points to suit their narrative. So don't do that, right? Like this, since we know that this is a policy, try to not have any narrative that you're trying to fulfill. So, for example, if let's say a narrative I'm trying to fulfill is I'm going to be a great data scientist, I will go looking for people who can validate that, right? Try not to do that and try to be genuinely curious about something that you want to do. And then the third thing is like deeply reflect on whether you actually want to do this. I'll give you an example. One of my friends, who works in consumer and has been there, reached out to me the other day and was like, "Hey, I want to move to technology." And I'm like, why? And they were like, hey, it's interesting and it pays well. And I was like, you don't like technology? Like, what are you even like? You've said this explicitly to me. Why do you want to move now? And they're like, I'd probably become obsolete, which is a fair career concern. But I think it doesn't involve that deep reflection that happens. And you need to have that deep reflection because you can't experiment and not do something after that, right? Like then it's a wasted experiment, basically.
Yeah.
If your hypothesis is proven true.
Yeah, no, I love that, because sometimes experiments can also be, blindsiding, because then if you don't have an end objective with the experiment on a hypothesis, or, if the foundation of that experiment is not correct to begin with, then it's blindless after all. So, no,
Yeah.
that's interesting to hear. And I rather really like the last pointer of self-reflection. That's a good segue to, in fact, one thing that I really want to talk about, and this is something that I am particularly curious about in terms of, some soft skills, which are, as I like to call it, harder than most hard skills, right? And it'd be interesting to just take it forward, and I can perhaps, talk about a couple of these
So,
specific traits, and you can
yeah.
perhaps provide your opinion, because
So,
again, your vantage point from a geographical sense, from a organizational purview, and from the diverse experiences you've had, I think that
yeah.
just add on to a lot of the things that we want to understand.
So,
Therein, the first one that I think is extremely crucial and poorly understood is feedback, right? And feedback in the aspect of just delivering feedback in a non-violent manner, or taking feedback in a way that you do not get defensive about it, and
yeah.
actually introspect, accept it in a way that makes you better, right? So,
Yeah.
given that entire context, Kaushik, I'd love any practical anecdotes, your understanding of feedback, because I think this is something that is so crucial, yet underspoken of, highly underspoken of. So, yeah,
Yeah.
over to you.
Yeah. You're spot on, right? And I'd actually love to understand what kind of experiences you've had as well, like with feedback both upward and downward, right? I think giving and receiving feedback is an art that is not taught in most organizations. Actually, I feel like two places that do this very well, thankfully, are McKinsey and Facebook. So I think, and this is a topic I'm quite passionate about. So I'll go a little bit, but I think first thing for feedback is you need to have a culture that is appreciative of feedback, and it needs to be entrenched in the company culture or company systems, right? Like you can't say that like you can't give feedback in an environment that is hostile to feedback. So the first thing is that the environment needs to be great, and the environment needs to be welcoming of feedback of all sorts. It can't just be like a manager telling the people they manage, or vice versa, right? It has to be all around, upward, downward. That's number one. And I feel like this sounds very easy to do, but most companies don't have it, and it's a very very hard thing to implement because essentially it involves having a very low ego, which a lot of people don't have, is what I've realized. That's number one. Now, number two is I think unsolved. So number two is like the structure, right? And like this is more from a personal point of view. No one actually taught me how to give feedback until the point that I landed at. I think business school taught me a little bit, and then McKinsey kind of perfected it. and Facebook, I was able to use it, right? There are different ways of doing it. So I think like simple things, right? So one, be objective about it. Don't be subjective about it. Number two, you can always talk about how you felt, but don't like do a personal attack, right? Number three is have some kind of an example, right? So like anecdotes of this or examples of this is someone coming and telling me, I don't really enjoy working with this person. And this person is a bully, and this person like really attacks me. How that can be rephrased one to them is to say, hey, you said this which made me feel like this, and I would like you not to say this or make me feel like this in the future. One of the best things about feelings is that nobody can dispute how you felt because it is your innate personal feeling. So when you phrase it that way, it is objective, and at the same time, it is undisputable because you felt that way, and no one can say that, oh, you are wrong to feel that way, right? Like it doesn't work. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two is like when you're talking about any kind of like projects that are more quantitative, and when you're not really talking about behaviors, right? So this feeling is like, so let's split work into the what and the how, and this feeling model of feedback I think works for the how. For the what, I think you have to go with some kind of an example, which is to say, hey, you are generally slow at delivering projects, or you do not stick to deadlines. And on project A and project B, for example, on both of these, you said they will be done in 4 weeks, but they were done in 8 weeks, for example, right? But it is also your job to make sure that when you're giving feedback on the what, you are able to string together a pattern and kind of give that feedback in the most helpful way possible, rather than somebody slipping on some deadline at one point and usually them being great on it. And that you should give them assume good intent over there. Ultimately, I'll leave by saying that like feedback generally is a gift, but I have noticed that in cultures where feedback is not entrenched in the culture, people don't necessarily like it. So I used to go around giving feedback to people, like, in the interest of radical candor. I've kind of stopped now because I've realized that unsolicited feedback people don't like. So in environments where it is encouraged, I try to give it. Otherwise, I don't.
No, that's wonderful. I think that's so spot on, especially that framework of laying it down in a manner that is both objective and anecdotal in nature, such that the other person can take it in a manner that is workable as well, and not just too abstract in nature. I really love that. That's especially amazing. Any quick tips, Kaushik, for the ones receiving feedback, right? How do you not tend to take feedback in a way that you get defensible, not in a way that you start justifying it, and in your head it's not you dismiss it right away. Any quick tips there?
Sure. 1 second, sorry.
Sure.
Sorry, there was background noise. So I think the first thing is, if somebody is giving you feedback, you have to think of it as a gift, because if you are generally someone with some kind of a protagonist mindset, you want to get data points that help you improve and help you become a better person. So nobody is going to give you feedback to generally attack you unless they are a toxic manager, in which case you should leave the organization, but or change your manager. But in general circumstances, nobody is going to give you feedback to attack you. People will give you feedback so that you want to improve. So one, have a positive mindset. That said, nobody really likes hearing shit about themselves, right? Like, let's be real here. Like, we're human after all. So I think one way I really like, or what I do, for example, especially when somebody delivers constructive feedback, especially is I tend to write word down, because what happens is that when I hear it, my my system one kind of kicks in, my lizard brain kicks in, right? And I don't want to react at the time, so I will write it down, and then I will process it, and then I will try to think about what this person was actually trying to say, because a lot of times, like, people give also feedback on the basis of the environment they were in or the circumstance they were in, so you have to kind of discount and account for that as well, where appropriate.
Absolutely.
Right. So I just write it down, don't react, read it 2 days later, process it, and then try and improve your way of working if there is any material or meat.
Wow, no, that's again very actionable and helpful, because as you mentioned, I don't think the natural stimuli for us to criticism is, okay, I'll reflect right on spot and work on it right away. We need that processing framework and time to at least guide it down, and which is what you mentioned.
Yeah.
This is wonderful. I think amazing to hear about feedback in its entirety. The
Yeah.
next one, which is in close connection to feedback itself, in my opinion, is conflict resolution, right? So a
Yeah.
large part of how we deal with conflicts, it may be due to feedback, but in solidarity, when we consider conflicts, it could be about not taking things personally, about using
Yeah.
communication as a tool which is non-offensive in nature and can lay down the benefit of the organization as opposed to being targeted towards one specific individual or a group of individuals, right? What are some of the
Yeah.
ways that you've seen conflicts having played out in organizational workplaces, and what are some of the useful tips that you think would be helpful for us
Yeah.
to understand?
Yeah. I think on conflicts, right? Practically like 9 in 10 times, all of the conflicts that I have seen, been part of, or been called in to resolve are conflicts of ego and personality rather than conflicts of or miscommunication
Yeah.
rather than conflicts of actual like we disagree on this strategy or we disagree on this point,
Yeah.
right? So let's get the content one out first. When you disagree on strategy or when you disagree on a particular direction or anything that is content related and both parties are still happy with each other but just don't agree on this, one is either you can disagree or commit, or second, if you're in an organization where escalation is a good thing. So for example, in a lot of big tech companies including Facebook, escalation is considered to be a good thing. So you escalate, right? And because that is literally what managers are there for, which is to help sort out and kind of help you figure out what to do. In ego clashes and personality clashes, um, as you may realize through the podcast, I'm generally a fan of like sleeping through things for 48 hours because I'm very well aware of my drawbacks, and other people also have the same thing where people in the moment will say things that they don't believe or don't want to say, but it'll just come out as a result of like
Yeah.
the situation.
Yeah.
So generally, like the first step to if I'm called in to resolve a conflict is to tell both parties to take a holiday for 2 days or not talk to each other for 2 days and then get together in 2 days. When you get these parties together, so let's say it's two people on my team or two like one person on my team and one different person, I think it is important to go on a fact finding mission as a manager to find out exactly what has happened, if there are any other parties that are there. And usually people will have documents or people will have some kind of paper trail, or somebody would have been in some meeting with that conflict. Find those data points, talk to each of them individually, try to find out what is troubling them, and then get both of them in the room. Because you cannot be an effective, like, you can't resolve conflicts effectively unless you have an unbiased third party opinion and you have opinions of both parties individually. Otherwise, you're just playing like, you're just like, it's basically then you're recreating the conflict and you're just watching. That's not going to help.
Yeah. No, again, I am really loving the viewpoint where you're talking about the smaller unscalables which are important to devote time to, such that it eventually comes out and does something better, right? Because again, the natural instinct could very well be to get carried away in the heat of the moment or to solve conflicts right away. But just that extra amount of patience, effort, time, and the micro non-scalables are so important and go a long way in resolving stuff. So I think those are
And
great cues.
to be
One,
honest,
yeah.
on this, if I may add another point, like I feel like this actually is one of the main roles of the manager, right? Like I find that like in most like empowered teams, like again to use Marty Kagan's terminology, I think the difference is that the first line of manager, so not like your director of product or head of product or VP product, not that level. The layer in the middle essentially is for providing context, connecting the dots, solving these kinds of conflicts, and mainly like developing talent and coaching the talent to get to the next level, right? Like that is the job. Like the job is not micromanaging and making sure projects are delivered on time, because you need to have that trust in the team that you ideally have hired yourself or have inherited, that they will deliver things on time. And if not, you have that feedback mechanism. But yeah, I just wanted to make that point to say that
Yeah.
this is like one of the key goals.
Yeah, I think no, that makes complete sense, especially for somebody just starting out on their career. It becomes such a pivotal step because you need that guidance early on, and that's what shapes you as a leader as well. Because you only learn by osmosis what you are essentially seeing, observing, whatnot, right? So yeah, I think that's wonderful. Just one last quick, sort of trait on this line of question. But I
Yeah.
think what I've observed with you as well, and a lot of your answers talk about listening intently, right? And we've spoken about doing the talking and taking time out to, just communicate better. But how important and crucial is listening? And do you think at all that is a trait which is mostly missed? Because we confuse listening by not hearing, in my opinion, because listening is such an important, there's a great distinction there, right? Like listening intently can be a huge quality, in my opinion. But sometimes we just confuse that by staying quiet, which is not
Yeah.
definitely not an equivalent. So would love to hear your thoughts there, Kaushik.
Yeah. And picking up on a thread that I left hanging earlier, I would split this into listening to form your narrative versus listening to underscore your narrative, right? I feel that most people, including me, for most part, instinctively do listening to underscore my narrative, right? I have something in my head that I think that like, hey, this is a fact, and I go around finding data points to suit that fact. And if a data point doesn't suit that fact, I ignore it. The harder thing to do is listening intently in order to form your narrative, right? To say, I don't know anything, I have no opinions, and I want to form opinions on the basis of data that I get or like the conversations that I have. It is very hard to put oneself in that mindset because humans are inherently opinionated. But if you be intentional about it, which is something I'm trying to do, then what ends up happening is you start forming a picture that might be wildly different from what your opinion might be. The other thing that happens is you are forced to listen because usually when people are talking, you can tune in and out because most people don't have like the content density is not very high in most people, including myself, right? So you tend to kind of zone in, zone out. But if you are listening to shape your opinion, and if you keep reminding yourself that I know nothing, then automatically your body language and your listening capability goes up. The hack that I have learned now for doing this is to write. So I write now a lot, and I kind of force myself. I don't like it. I'm not an inherent like note taker, but I just force myself to write everything that people say, so that I'm able to be as unbiased as possible on that, and it kind of distracts my mind from thinking.
Absolutely no. I can, with the little experience I've had with the podcast itself, like large part of doing this is, objectively driven by listening intently to what a guest is saying and then build on top of it. And I think that's a practice that I've come to realize is very helpful. And I completely concur with all the points that you mentioned. So this was
Yeah,
fabulous. I think this was great to understand about these soft skills. But if
yeah,
we go objective and qualitative again for a bit of time and talk about maybe team design and organizational design with
yeah,
context to the softer sides of collaboration, teamwork, whatnot, right? And given that
yeah.
product teams are going to be crucial and at the center of organizations, if you can talk to us about how teams are designed, how organizations are designed in a broader context, and maybe then dive deeper into how these qualitative aspects shape out and how they can be make or break in certain teams, I think that would be
Yeah.
wonderful to hear.
Sure. This is quite a broad
Yeah.
range of things I can talk about here. So I'll try to frame this right. I think one is like thinking about like what kind of org I've, for example, seen work and what kind of orgs exist today, right? Policies that are there. Let's attack that first. So broadly, if I think about it, right, I've seen most like tech orgs either being feature factories, where it is either a founder or a founding team member deciding that this has to be built. So hey, product manager, go get this built out,
Yeah.
right? And I generally think that that model builds what the founder wants because that's really what you're doing, and in the end doesn't end up scaling as much as building something that the customer would want, right? But that said, for somebody who is who has a very like kind of command and control kind of a model, or somebody who has generally believes in a very high power distance, I feel like this model will work. I don't like it. I would probably not want to work in a company like that, but I've seen that a lot of companies actually are this way.
Yeah.
I also feel that like doing something like that separates product from business, which to my view removes every, if not most, advantages that building a technology company has, right? Because then you're going back to this old world framework that I had,
Yeah.
right? Then you're becoming a soap company. You're not doing anything different from
Yeah.
a soap company,
Yeah.
um, right? The second kind of org design is thinking about like how can I empower decision making to the lowest levels, right? When you think about empowering decision making to the lowest levels, again going back to my like shirt factory analogy, right? You are empowering the worker on the factory floor in the analogy to do whatever they like, right? And so tomorrow they might want to make a pocket square instead of making a shirt. And I'm using this rather simplistic analogy so that so that it lands. But um, when you empower decision making to the people who are actually talking to the customers and on the ground, and not like 25 levels above at like an exec level, you are actually building, I think, what the customer wants. The challenge with that is, one, you need to have like really low power distance, which requires you to have very high trust and very, very low ego, which is something that is a very hard thing to do at in an organization. The second thing is that there is a tax that is associated with it, because not everybody might be as good as to make those kinds of decisions. Number one, because you can try to hire great, but you can never hire perfect, right? Number two is that there is a tax that is associated with that decision making coming from the bottom up, right? Which is why the system that I like is kind of somewhere in the middle, right? So you empower product teams individually to kind of prioritize or come up with a prioritization list, but you deliver constraints top down. So you say that, okay, like our strategy is, I don't know, we are going to build, I don't know, for example, solutions for gaming content creators, let's say, right? And like our vision is to be the number one platform. And I'm just making this up as I go, but our vision is to be the number one platform for video game, number one platform for esports monetization, let's say, hypothetically, right? So what we want to do then is, you disambiguate that into like a product strategy to say, okay, like our key customers are people who stream on like these kinds of platforms, and these are the customer problems that they have. So let's say, for example, you want to build a unified inbox for them. You want to build pay in crypto for them. You want to build all of those kinds of things. That feature, like that list of customer problems comes from the bottom up, but deciding what space or what are the constraints that we want to be in comes from top down. I find that the middle layer then kind of serves as a prioritization layer and helps you kind of allocate resources from one team to the other, helps you decide what needs to be done. I like that model because I think that delivers a good balance where everybody on the team feels empowered, and at the same time, it is not entirely decentralized to an extent where exec level is like, I don't even know what is happening in this company.
Wow, no, that's good to hear. I mean, the amalgamation of both of those concepts and hierarchies, brings in the great mix of what you just spoke about. I think that's wonderful to hear. Any thoughts, Kaushik, around the collaborative aspect of how, again, as fundamentally how we can look at collaboration, the mindset of keeping we before me, and take a no blame games and things like that. Again, the smaller qualitative aspects that go a long way in perhaps shaping the culture of an organization. I think that'd be great to just wind this entire line of thought.
Yeah. So I think in at the final unit of abstraction, right? So in this product team, I feel like that team should not have rigid roles. Of course, like people should have roles, they should have job titles and all of those kinds of things. But teams that have found like great success happening is teams where the entire product team is aligned on a particular kind of vision, and generally the PM is not saying, "Hey, I'm the like I hate this, right? Like I'm the CEO of the product," or whatever meme that goes around, or like someone saying that, "Hey, this is my job, this is your job." Like I feel like unless you get out of that mindset and you're working towards like collective success, it is not going to work. Therefore, I feel that in order to collaborate in these kinds of product teams, number one is you need to have you shouldn't have very clear swim lanes, or at least you shouldn't have rigid swim lanes. Even if you have clear swim lanes, it's great, but you shouldn't have rigid swim lanes where only one person is supposed to do something, and if they don't do it, no one else is going to do it, or no one else can do it. The second thing is you need to constantly share information to parties who are interested and parties who may be interested, right? So, for example, like especially in in tech companies where you have multiple product teams, there are a lot of intersection points that go unnoticed, right? And yes, like the leads will probably share context and will try to join the dots, but a lot of times those dots are missed. So it is also important for teams from like people from different teams to talk to each other proactively and share information so that you are like everybody is able to connect the dots and it is not just like a single point of failure over there. It's still a single point of accountability, but not a single point of failure. Lastly, I would say is that there are some things that can be done only by specialists. So, for example, like data science, like is a hard skill, design is a hard skill, but a lot of things can be picked up by different people. So don't assume that because somebody is called X job title, they cannot do something, right? Uh, Believe in the greatness in people and believe that people are generally capable of doing things and try it out. Is what I
Right.
would say.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, collective success is a term which is, wonderful, and I think should be used more often for sure. And especially the last point as well, like not going by de facto assumptions and just trying your hand at knowing that people will be helpful and figuring out a way is a great cue again. Wonderful, Kaushik. And I think, next up, as you were just like going about your, you used the word empowering, spoken a large part about leadership as well, but not like pinning it through. So if you had
Yeah,
to directly talk about leadership and leading teams, and also from a viewpoint of not having to be the leader to be a leader. What I mean by that is, just wearing those leadership shoes
yeah,
despite what your title says. I think
yeah,
that be an important thing to just understand, because at least in my opinion, and I cannot speak from experience, but from what I can understand and what I think, is that leadership is a mindset more than a title. And if you can
yeah,
perhaps expand on that frame of mind, framework of thought, I think that
yeah,
would be wonderful. And if you have any anecdotes of having learned from any leaders that you've seen and from experience
yeah,
how you have gone about it, I think that'd be
yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah. Why don't I start with an anecdote this time, right?
Sure.
Or like some contrasting experiences. When I was in like non-technology industry,
Hmm.
basically, manager's job was the summation of all their reports jobs, right? So you have four reports. Their sum is your impact, right? One of my mentors told me to think about it in a very different way, and this is like what I did at Facebook, and this is generally like the tech way of thinking as well. Is your impact as a manager is the exponent that you can add to the sum of your reports, because your job then becomes more of like a coach, right? How do you help your team do better? How do you help them become better at their craft? How do you help them find better opportunities? And generally, you should be gold for. Uh, Ideally, like the way I think about it is, and again, management is different from leadership, right? So I'll separate both of those things out. But like generally, I think like leadership for me is, can you inspire, can you evangelize, can you set a strategy, can you set like resources, can you allocate resources effectively, and generally can you make decisions that determine the future of your organization, right? And can you get people to buy in from that? And then there's the other aspect of management, which is more around, can you coach? Can you empower? Can you help people do better at their jobs? Can you find better opportunities for people? All of those kinds of things. So I would separate those two things out. In order to do that, I think one of the prerequisites is that you shouldn't be a control freak, and you shouldn't be insecure. Which is a very hard thing to say, right? Like because nobody's born nobody's born insecure, but they become insecure over time. So and everybody has different levels of imposter syndrome. I had it multiple times. So I think the as a manager, the thing that you want to think about at that point in time is, I need to be as secure as possible so as to add value to the people I manage. And my insecurity is only going to make outcomes worse. That is how I like to think about it. So I'll pause there, and there's
Yeah.
obviously lots more we can talk about this.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, a large part of the vocabulary that you're using, which goes to show that the evangelism aspect of leadership and just being able to separate management, because I think there's a famous quote, right? Like every leader is a manager, but not every manager is a leader. So I think that
Yeah,
just that's the thought you've echoed there. But I just want to take a moment to double click on how leaders can look at just the empowering fact, right? Like how can you optimize for the success of each of your teammates, and how can you
Yeah.
actively look for those metrics as well, where you're not just optimizing for what somebody delivers, but how they
Yeah.
deliver it and what they can do to better it as well, so such that
Yeah.
it compounds for them in the long term. I think
Yeah.
that thought process is so crucial again and again.
Yeah.
I would love to indulge your practical experiences on that
Yeah.
front.
Yeah. So I actually have a very interesting story on this. It's probably one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. Right. I think the first thing now I do is try and understand the motivations of the people I manage, and I'll tell you why.
Wow.
When I started managing at Facebook, I assumed that everybody is, I mean, coming from India, working in like consulting, this and that. You just assume that everybody wants to get promoted all the time, and career growth is probably the most important vector to maximize on. And therefore, like, people will do anything that you want in order to maximize career growth, right? Um, in one of the organizations that I worked at, and one of the team members that I was managing abroad, one person basically came and told me that I was like, hey, you should do these two projects. I found these for you, and I was very happy because I was like, as a manager, I found like these step up opportunities and projects that will give this person a lot of visibility. And I was like, you should do these two projects because they're great. Think about it. If you want to do them, this will like help you like get promoted and do all of those kinds of things. And this person was like, no, I don't want to do them. And I was like, why? Because this person was like, hey, look, like I want to spend more time with my family. I want to have a great work-life balance. I have a great work-life balance right now. From what you're telling me, I am doing well at my job, and I'm happy. Like that's all. That is all that matters to me. And if I take these two projects, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ruin my work-life balance. I'm not going to spend more enough time with my family, and I'm going to like ruin this balance that I have amongst all aspects of my life. And just for some additional money and moving to the next level, that's not important to me. Like I don't want to do it. And honestly, like for me, this was the first time like anyone has said this, right? Because generally I've been surrounded by type A type people who are very like, and it's not about type A or any other type, but like people who optimize for career growth, whatever happens. At least I'm like that.
Yeah.
So I was shocked. I had no idea what to say. And I went to my manager, and my manager at the time was like, yeah, like you did the wrong thing because like your job is to optimize for like, what people want. And your job is to make sure that they are able to deliver the best outcome within the constraints that they have for themselves. And then we evaluate that on that basis, right? So this is like a learning experience for you. And you need to now think about how do you manage this kind of a person, because that is something new for you, right? So I think the first thing, and this is a long story short. After this, this person like is one of the best people I've worked with, really close friends with, and did really well in their career and etc. etc. But I think the first thing as a manager you need to think about is what is important for the person who you're managing. It may not be career growth. It may be spending time with their spouse who they've just married, or maybe spending time with their baby who they've just had, or maybe spending time with their parents because they moved to a different city for this job just to be close to their parents. Identify what that is, right? And optimize for that. Don't optimize for what you think is best for the person, because like this is not your career, this is their career. So that's number one. Number two, I would say is be like give room to fail. Like don't give room for catastrophe. Your job is to like kind of cushion that and make sure that things don't completely go to shit. But give room to fail, because like no one's going to really grow unless they know like they go wrong a couple of times. And the third thing is don't hoard opportunities and credit, because honestly, like opportunities and credit, the more you give to your team, it is all going to come to you only. If someone on your team does really well, they're going to say that, hey, like this person is in Kaushik's team. Kaushik must have done something right that this person is doing so well. So you're only holding yourself back by holding people back. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's incredible. I mean, I especially loved the first point, and I think that needs to be echoed more and more because as managers, as colleagues, as working folks, professionals, we tend to just like focus so much on the quantifiables and the things that we generally think people would like to chase that we often forget to just stop and question what the
Yeah.
motivation of each other could be, right? Like, why are we even doing this? And it could be for the smallest of actions. And it's great to just hear you grasp that and lay it out for us in such a beautiful manner. So kudos to you for bringing that up. But that was wonderful, right? And I mean, again, one of the important parts that I think maybe we can touch upon as well is
Yeah.
we've understood the trait side of it. We've also understood the recognition of career options. But how do you make transitions, right? So within orgs, what's the upward management spoke? And this is something you brought up earlier. I would love to understand how we can perhaps talk about it more openly. Why is it not an open conversation, and why is it
Yeah.
considered to be a closed room discussion, or water cooler chatter only?
Yeah.
I would love to understand how you've seen that play out and how perhaps we can focus on that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'll start off with the caveat that a lot of this is dependent on the culture of the organization and the environment that is there, right? And I know a lot of founders and CEOs listen to your podcast, so I wish that more people start building this kind of a culture.
Hmm.
I think having and now coming to the question that you asked, I think having an open relationship with your manager is is key to making sure that you progress well, right? Both in terms of what you can deliver, how you're feeling, but also what you cannot deliver, and how if you're not feeling great about something, you
Yeah.
should be able to have those conversations with your manager, and not assume that your manager is some kind of devil who's out to get you. Ideally, right? Again, like I did caveat all of this with culture and assume
Yeah.
your intent right at the beginning.
Yeah.
I'll give some tactical tips now because on what you can do. I think the first thing that is very important is to have a career plan of some sort, like even if it's a year or 2 years or whatever that may be, and run that with your manager specifically. Even if you don't work in an organization that encourages this, it is not a bad thing to talk to your manager about. And honestly, I think most managers would appreciate it, irrespective of the relationship you have with them, because you are kind of giving them some kind of a responsibility to say that, hey, this is my career, this is how I would like to see it go, and I would like your help in helping me get there, right? And you want to keep this a little bit ambiguous, so you don't want to. This is not to say that in 6 months I want to get promoted, and in 6 months I want to get promoted again. But
Yeah.
this is more around, like, if you can frame it more around like the skills and the topics that you want to develop expertise around, or the functions that you want to learn from, that becomes a far easier ask for your manager, right? So I think the first thing is be very, very upfront about what is it that you want, so that your managers can go and optimize for that. I think the second thing that is very important in like upward management, especially in like tech companies, is making sure that you are really, really aligned on what your like goals and metrics are. I won't go into the OKR rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
broadly, whatever metrics your organization is aligned on, which are the ones that you are going to try and move, and how much are you going to move them by, is a very, very important conversation that you need to have, and you need to write that down somewhere.
Mm.
And third and like last thing is like, how do you actually implement these two things, right? I
Mm.
think the first one is, if you're not having a weekly one-on-one with your manager, you might think you're great and you might be great, but it is important to have a chat with the manager every week, at least for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is, one, because number one, you can get context, you can get a lot of blocking and tackling done, but you can also talk about any challenges that you're facing in terms of moving these goals and moving these metrics, and your manager is not taken by surprise. As a manager, I can tell you that probably the number one thing on my list that I wasn't very fond of was surprises, right? Like, something is not going to get delivered, and we knew this for 3 months, but like no one told me. Like, that's not that's not the best thing, because that just puts people in bad light. And then the second thing is, set up at least quarterly, if not every 2 months, career planning sessions with your manager, with no obligations whatsoever, but at least set them up so that your manager knows that you're intensely thinking about your career. Because if you're not thinking about your career and you're not talking to your manager about it, you're only thinking about it in your own head, right? Like, you're making a khayali pulao. That is not that's not it's not great.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some tactical tips on how to manage upward. But this is a topic that is very dear to my heart, so happy to do any follow-ups there as well.
Yeah, no, I especially like the clarity in terms of the structure you're laying out for us. The only maybe, double clicking I'd love there is how do you go about, again, like these communications can be, difficult, right? So you briefly spoke about how you have to have that mix as well, right? You can't be
Yeah,
completely direct about, promotion to promotion, because again, that's a lot of, futuristic in opinion, and it'll be a
yeah,
lot based on how the actions are. But how do you
yeah,
maintain that sort of communication, that sort of transparency? To say that you need to have an open relationship with your manager is one thing. To say that you want to take initiative and talk about career planning is one thing. But how can you actionably communicate that in a way that is not condescending, or that does not seem like you're only focused on yourself? Like, these are the apprehensions that
yeah.
people will have to begin with. I think that would be just interesting to hear very quickly.
Yeah. So one thing that I found success in is, and all of this is assuming a manager is a capable person who you don't entirely hate, right? Um, Try and put a mentorship hat to your manager and try and get them to be your mentor, not just somebody who's supervising your work, right?
Mhm.
When you do that, what ends up happening is that you open up a lot of other topics that might not necessarily fall within the realm of like traditional management, right? So you start talking about, for example, like, hey, I'm doing this podcast on on the side, and like this is great, and this is what I'm deriving a lot of energy from. Will you take a listen to it and tell me what you think? Or like, do you think this is like great for me long term, or should I go to business school or not? Should I, should I move from product to something else, or should I move from something else to product? Like, those are all like longer term discussions that you start having, which managers also generally kind of figure out that they don't have any control over. So they tend to then not be as guarded talking about it. The moment you start talking about like promotions and only talk about promotions, then they're like, yeah, this is something I can control. And this is something broadly, is something that I don't decide individually, but I play a key part in deciding. That becomes a very transactional conversation.
Yeah.
If you talk more about these are the skills I want to build, this is what I want to do long term, then the manager is like, ha, yeah, 10 years, may, if you want to do this, let me now give you like some advice on how you can do this, right?
Right.
And yeah, even if you don't like your manager, I think like there is some learning to be derived from out of everybody. So try and see the best.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah. So just like leveraging the opportunity beyond the realms and like diving into some of these things which will eventually connect back and will be helpful to develop and cultivate that relationship. So
Yeah,
that's helpful. Great. I mean, this has been wonderful. And, as we enter the closing phases of this
yeah,
amazingly qualitative conversation, I think this is on popular demand, but everybody, I'm sure, and you've answered this multiple times, right? But what are some key traits, so beyond the qualitative aspects, what do you think has really worked in your favor when you've come to the execution standpoint of delivering on the job? And we're talking about one of the most competitive leading tech organizations in the world that you've been a part of,
yeah,
and you've delivered continuously, right? So can
yeah.
you just talk us through what are some things that have really helped you? These could be frameworks, these could be traits, these could be best practices that you've observed personally or professionally. But I think this would be wonderful to just like conclude on at least the qualitative aspect of what we've discussed throughout.
Sure. So I think definitely having a very diverse experience in my opinion helped a lot. Right. I
Mm,
started off selling shampoo in Siliguri, which is a small town in northeast in East India.
mm,
And then I went on to like brand, and then I went to product development, and then I was in consulting, and then now I'm in a tech company.
mm,
So I think that diverse, like you start connecting the dots at some level
mm,
um, when you have that diverse set of experiences. So one of the things I realized, and honestly used to be ashamed of initially, was like I was not from a tech background, right? So
yeah,
initial phase, I used to be quite coy about like what I did before.
mm,
But then the more and more I started working, I realized that there are a lot of things that you can translate from one to the other, right?
mm,
And then I started becoming more and more like cognizant of it. Now I'm really proud of it. Now, Kulke, I talk about the fact that I'm not from a tech background, right? So I think that diversity of experience really helped. Number two, I would say is not like I would say not listening to people also helps a lot. And I know this kind of counterintuitive on a podcast, but generally when people say you can't do something, people are making that statement on the basis of their own experience, and nobody has the experience of the entire world.
yeah,
So generally it is nice to go test when someone says you can't do something. Can you do that? You should probably go test that.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is making sure that you have extremely supportive people, and increase the this concept that I recently learned about serendipity surface area, right?
Mm.
The more you increase that, the more people you talk to, and the more open you are about your aspirations and what you're doing and all of those kinds of things, the more people start connecting the dots for you,
Yeah.
right? So that's why I try to like talk to as many people as possible, try to give back as much as possible, because in a way it's very selfish as well, because I know that when two of those people talk to each other and if there's something great for me there, they're going to think about me, right? And they're going to
Absolutely.
call me, right? There is a selfish angle to it as well. So I think that number three is that, because like if I honestly think about like all the changes that I've made that have particularly been difficult changes,
Yeah.
it has been number one because some people took a bet on me. So for example, like when I went from consumer to McKinsey, there was this partner in McKinsey who took a bet on me, who I will remain eternally grateful to.
Yeah.
Similarly on Facebook, right? The person who hired me took a bet on me. One is that, but also like having that supportive set of people around that you can have a phone call and you can say, I'm stuck with this at work, or I'm stuck with this in life. Can you help me? I think those are the three aspects I will
Right. No, that's wonderful again, simply because you've been so candid about accepting, that it was a journey that took time, that had to be
yeah
cultivated, and that there were pitfalls along the way. Like, it was not the easiest, right? Like, it could be so easy for you to perhaps paint a rosy picture of it, right? Like, you go
yeah
from one step to the other, or maybe in fact just talk about like the selfish angle of how you speak to people. I think that's
yeah
really, really candid and honest on your part, and great to mention. However, I was expecting you to talk about that framework that you have, and it was one of the most interesting ones that I've heard of, having a sounding board, right? And
yes
designing. This was
yeah
approximately six months back, and even before.
yes
But I fondly remember, and that has been something that I've been trying to channelize and cultivate for myself as well.
yeah
So maybe just if you could take a minute or two to just explain how that falls in the bandwidth of the larger picture that you set out for life as well, and how it has been helpful for you. I think that would be great.
Sure. So I came across this concept. Actually, one of the VPs at Facebook actually written about this, called having your personal board of directors, what it should constitute, etc.
Yeah.
That is something that I'd been doing informally, but I kind of chose to kind of like formalize it, and that was actually what I was alluding to in point three. So I'm really glad that you brought it up. Is having your own personal board of directors and having as like those for different aspects for your life, right? And when I say board of directors, they don't need to be meeting once every 3 months or meeting once every 6 months altogether. But what I do have now is I have kind of this board of people who are the people I go to and kind of who hold me accountable almost to a certain level, right? And this is constituted of like different people from different walks of life, from different stages of my life. Everybody should think about how their board is constituted. But for example, for me, there is one person who knows me from like the very beginning of my career.
Hmm.
There is one person who has nothing to do with tech and will have nothing to do with tech. So it gives me a very unbiased view outside of this tech bubble, right? There are one or two people from the tech world, one from like the big tech world, one from the broader ecosystem. Because what I find is that most people in big tech are not really connected to the broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
There is one person who is an entire contrarian, right? Like who lives in an anonymous identity on crypto, for example, right? So there are these, like, this is basically what broadly my board looks like. And what I do is at the beginning of every year and periodically over time, I say that like this is what I'm going to do and this is what I'm going to achieve, or these are my goals for the year, or these are my goals for the next 3 months, and they hold me accountable to that. So that's number one. Number two is every time I'm undergoing a big change in career, or I get a new opportunity, or I'm stuck at work, I will go to this board and I will go to one or two people on this board that I think will be able to help me out most. So, for example, when I switched from Facebook to my current job, I went to each one of the board of my board, had a conversation, got their views, and I made sure that I did that because I was able to then get diverse viewpoints and then figure out what was the best decision for me because I was grappling between two or three offers at the time, right? So I think everybody should have this their own board. Uh, if nothing else, it will help you build deep relationships with people who know you in life, and they will feel they will feel empowered to help you.
Yeah.
But if you want to be really selfish about it, it at least helps you make better decisions. So it's a no-brainer. I would totally recommend everyone to have their own personal board of directors.
Awesome. No, that's particularly helpful for sure, and I can testify to it because the first time I heard it, I was extremely curious and fascinated, and it goes for this time as well when I was hearing it because it's such a structured way of what we generally label as mentorship, which has become a loosely used word now. Because I think this just streamlines the process in a way that is involvement driven for everyone. It's engagement driven for everyone, for people who deeply care about you and diverse in nature. So I think that's a wonderful framework. Thanks for sharing that, Kaushik. For one of the last questions, I also want to now understand. Again, this is from a qualitative standpoint, but when we talk about long-term thinking, and one thing that I've starkly observed is from if there's one pattern I had to choose from the 60 odd conversations I've had on the show now, is there's a stark distinction recognition of a long-term goal or a vision that you have for your own self, right? So if you could indulge in a conversation where maybe tell us about how you look at these long-term goal setting objectives and then compound your actions towards it, right? Because I think the concept of compounding beyond the financial aspects of it in the real life aspect of it is way higher than it could ever be. So maybe just talk to us about what's the kind of value you're chasing in the long term and how do you approach that principle on a more short term basis. I think that'd be great to just grasp in a nutshell.
Sure. So obviously, like, one of the big policies of long term is that it is subject to a lot of externalities and you cannot predict those. So
Yeah.
with that caveat, I'll go. I like to think about this. It is almost similar to kind of writing a product vision, right? And I realize I'm using a lot of the jargon, but
No.
uh, ultimately it comes down to what do you want in your career, what do you want in your relationships, and what do you want in your finances, right? And over time, and with information, you start kind of developing a picture of what that is, right? So for example, like, career wise, you can optimize for either having learning or you can optimize for growing very quickly, right? I always say this, that if you don't change your career path from your first job, you will always get to the top much quicker than somebody else who has changed their career path multiple times, right? So for example, like if I had started, my first job was like, product in a tech company, I would probably be much ahead than what I am right now. But what I have in return is a lot of learning from different industries, which allows me to, at least be somewhat knowledgeable across a breadth of topics, which is important to me, right? And which is what is important for me to optimize on. So I think figuring out what that is, and I don't think it's necessarily a discrete outcome, right? It's not, I want to be CEO of a publicly listed company, let's say, for example. I feel like that is an after effect of what you optimize for,
Yeah.
right? But you need to optimize for something, or you need to have vision of something for you in your career, which could be something to say that I'm one of the best generalists in technology, or I am one of the leading thinkers on culture in technology companies, or I'm one of the best product builders that the world has ever seen. Whatever that may be, you need to have that kind of vision for yourself.
Right.
And I would translate that also into like finances, and I would translate that into relationships, right? One of the things that I'm getting better at is or at least learning a little bit more about is personal finance, right? Like a lot of people talk about like XYZ to the moon, right? And there is a sense of FOMO to say, yeah, why didn't I do this as well? But then you realize that you're optimizing for a completely different game, and like people are playing different games on personal finance. So you need to have that longer term vision to say that, like, hey, if my vision is to make sure that I have enough money at this particular age, I don't need to do to the moon today. I
Yeah.
can sit and compound 8% on S&P over the next 30 years, whatever that may be, right? So I think having that vision or that North Star then delivers, like, then you're automatically, in my opinion, able to cut out a lot of bad decisions in your life, right? So, for example, like I'll tell you, like, for me, one, like, my optimization function was always like, I need to like I truly believe in Mark Anderson's essay of software is eating the world. And I was like, I cannot be in consumer goods. Like I'll do well here, but I cannot be there. I want to move to technology. So, then the decision of whether I should leave a nice job in consumer goods or not is not a decision anymore. It's just like you have to do it, right? So it makes your life a lot easier. And then after that, you start compounding and all of those things. But I would say just having that one pivot simplifies your life a lot.
Awesome. No, that's wonderful. And one thing that I observe is just the recognition of having again that long-term vision and not getting sucked up in just following, becoming just reactive. Like, you have to be proactive in life from a long-term standpoint, and then maybe choose the optimization framework that you mentioned and then approach it. So I love that again, and this was amazing. For the last question, honestly, like I don't want to end with a stereotypical one, but given that we've spoken largely about developing this mindset that revolves around tech companies, careers in tech, and qualitative thought processes, if you had to perhaps end with, a bunch of final parting thoughts around developing this mindset in full, is there any concluding thoughts of developing, let's say, a tech mindset or a product mindset or anything of the kind in a career standpoint? I think that would be great to just understand how we can utilize and leverage principles of innate problem solving, of building things that would eventually solve purposes and add value. I mean, that mindset on a broad front, I think that would be great to just observe from despite which background we come from, right? So I think that'd be great to just end what has been a spectacular conversation, Kaushik.
So I have 2, 3 tips on that, which is how I try to do it. I think the first one is every time I read, I think about like how do I apply this in work and how do I apply this in personal life, right? One of the things that I have changed in my reading habit is before I used to read almost like read the book, forget about it, finish it. Now I read almost like I study, especially on books that are related to that are not fiction books, right? Like I will read something, I will think about it, I will take some notes, and I will try to apply that because ultimately it becomes a framework slash mental model game, right? You just need to reflect upon it and say, how can I apply this in my life, and suddenly we come to it. That's number one. Number two is also like the caveat that like this is also constantly evolving, and I truly believe that like we are at like a very very early stage in terms of like technology adoption and actually thinking around these kinds of things. So a lot of new things are going to come up that are unknown. So keep an open eye for those. And the third and last thing I'd say is I also don't have this mindset 100% of the time. I would be false to claim that I have it sometimes, and it's a very very hard thing to do. Like because we are not inherently we're not robots, right? So we can't always be rational, and we can't always think like that, and we can't always have a very results driven mindset to our life. So I fail more than I succeed, but I try.
Yeah. No, I think I try is perhaps the best end there could be to this episode, but this has been wonderful, Kaushik. I think from recognizing the smaller aspects of how we can tangibly navigate life in a career pathway, as well as qualitatively, to discussing the tangibles in terms of inculcating that mindset and understanding more about product roles. We've discussed everything from zero to one. So this has been absolutely fantastic. I loved the conversation, and I'm sure I have learned a lot. I hope you liked the conversation equally and enjoyed it.
Likewise, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and this was all I thought it would be and more. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And yeah, I really really enjoyed this hour and summer speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Kaushik. This was absolutely wonderful.